Hello, everybody. I am Louise Kenny from the Special Events Group. Patty, you can advance the slide a little bit. We have a terrific presentation today about immigration and the challenges of immigration and the ways in which immigrants, and particularly the three people presenting today, have paid it forward and given back to their communities. And it's been a difficult journey for them, and they have absolutely turned it around and really been contributing to Arlington in particular, but beyond that into to our country. Um, Before we get into some of the specifics here, I'd like to introduce Catherine Cheriboga from the Arlington Library. As you may know, we have a partnership with with Encore Learning Presents, which is our Monday events with the library. And Catherine would like to say a few words. Catherine?
Thank you, Louise. My name is Catherine Chiriboga. I'm a Programs and Partnerships Librarian at the Arlington Public Library. We look forward to seeing you in this winter season to take part in some of our programs to include book clubs, gentle yoga, knits and flicks to connect with others while staying warm. We also encourage people to participate in the winter reading program that starts January 1st, and prizes are available to readers of all ages. We have also had the great pleasure of working with Emma Violand-Sanchez on several library programs in the past, to include the release of her book. We have a recording available on the county's YouTube channel where she was in conversation with Diane Crush. I know that you're going to truly enjoy her incredible story as well as with the panelists. Thank you for these little moments of time, and back to you, Louise.
Well, thank you, Catherine. So you will be able to see two recorded presentations of this from the library, and then we are also recording this presentation as well. So you can find this on our YouTube channel in a day or so. Before we get going, I wanted to just talk a little bit about housekeeping for this presentation. Please use the Q&A function and not chat in asking questions, and we would ask you to hold your questions until the end. You should be able to see that Q&A icon fairly easily. Uh, when the questions come up, they will not be immediately available for you to see, but they will after they're answered, so that there will be scrolling questions on there. And may, by the way, consolidate questions because often questions relate to the same thing. When you leave the webinar today, we would ask you to complete the survey because that's really helpful to Emma and everybody presenting today, and also to us back at Encore Learning. So please do remember to do that. And if you have any technical problems, Patty at Encore Learning would be happy to help you. Email info@encorelearning.net and we can get your questions and problems answered. Before I get into that, I would like to tell you that we have some really fun things coming up. We have some tours coming up, but I just heard just before this that they're sold out. So if you would like to get on the waiting list for the tours, you should have gotten an email yesterday from Encore Learning about what's coming up. So if you have interest and want to be low on the waiting list, please do sign up for that. But we have a highlight coming up in January, a film called Films to Trails film, which is all about how they converted railroad tracks that are no longer in use to trails. It's been a long time process. The author Peter Harnack will be with us. It'll be on January 26th, Monday at 2:30, and it will be live at George Mason. So jot that down on your calendar as well. Um, and then right after that is our course preview for the spring semester 2026 course preview, which will be on Thursday, January 29th at 9:30. And we're happy to say there are 42 courses being offered, 32 new courses, 24 in person and 13 virtual. So it's really going to be quite an array of courses. So please do join us for the preview. So on to our presentation at hand here. We have a presentation by uh, Emma Violand-Sanchez, and then two people that she has mentored and have really contributed on their own, inspired and helped by her, Brian Maniking and Karen Vallejos. They will be talking about their journeys as immigrants and also the work that they've done in giving back to the community. So Emma is probably known to many of you, and you may have seen her at the presentation at the library. She was born in Bolivia. She's an educator, and she's absolutely a fierce advocate for immigrants in our communities. She has a BS and an MS from Radford University in Radford, Virginia, and a doctorate from George Washington University. She's had a 42-year-old career with the Arlington Public Schools, and she's the first Latina elected to the school board. She's consulted throughout the US and Latin America and has published widely in English and in Spanish and has a slew of awards that recognize her contributions. She's awarded the Fulbright Fellowship, the AAUW, which is American Women's Organization, their American Fellowship. She was named as a Washingtonian of the Year by the magazine, and she was awarded the Arlington Spirit of Community Awards. And then also in 2024, she was the Marquee Who's Who Lifetime Achievement Award. So you have a very accomplished speaker speaking with us today, and she's really got quite a story to tell about her background, what she's gone through, what she's learned, and how she's helped. So I would like to introduce you to Emma Violand-Sanchez. Emma?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's really an honor for me to have the opportunity to talk with all of you, and also later to introduce Brian Marroquin and Karen Vallejos, who, as I see them, they are our Arlingtonians of the year, really, because of all the work they have done and all of the contributions as young immigrants coming to Arlington. Briefly, I will talk a little bit about my book, Dreams and Shadows: An Immigrant Journey. Basically, my book traces my personal journey as an immigrant, an educator, an advocate, and a public servant. I am very proud to have worked in the Arlington Public Schools for 40 years at all levels. For me, when we talk about the immigrant journey, it's really a reflection on the acculturation process. And I consider acculturation to be a lifelong process because, and I believe in creating our own bicultural identity. And it is, at least for me, it has been a journey that the anchors in my life are faith, family, education, and actually the meaning of service. Immigration is the central theme, but I have written Dreams and Shadows to be more just an immigration story. It's also about glass ceilings and what it takes to break and not be broken by them, and the extra challenges and hurdles that women face whether they live in Bolivia or the United States. As you can see in the photo, I am one of 6 girls in my family, or 6 women. At the left, you see my mother with 5 of us in Cochabamba, Bolivia, and later you see us when we had a family reunion. You also see a photo of my grandchildren as well as my first husband. For me, as I have written, the question of immigration is really a question about who are we and what is it that we want to be as a nation. And I think it has never been more urgent. And I'm hopeful that Dreams and Shadows will make a positive difference. I hope that readers who have lived as immigrants will see their own experience reflected in the book, and it will help other readers understand more fully what the experiences results. Arriving in Virginia from Bolivia in the summer of 1961, I was a high school senior. As it happens with all immigrants, the decision to immigrate is not an easy decision. In my case, it was my brave mother who had 6 daughters. Unfortunately, at that time, my father and my mother were separated. So my mother had to make the difficult decision to send the 3 oldest ones to the United States. It was my aunt, Mercedes Sanchez, who was a an instructor of Spanish at the Foreign Service, that she told my mother that the 3 oldest ones, we could come to the States and maybe we can live with American families and have an opportunity of an education. it was a very painful personal journey because, we came without my parents. I was fortunate to come to Fairfax County to live with an American family, the Powelsons. They were Quakers, and they welcomed me so that I could be teaching their children Spanish and to babysit at night when they went out. But again, it was one of the most painful academic experiences. And this is where I feel very strongly that as a young immigrant coming to our public schools without speaking English, it is one of the most difficult experiences that a young person can have, because after you arrive and you enter an American high school where there's about 2,000 students, and you see yourself lost, really, because of the language. And of course, without my family, it was hard. But the hardest thing, I think, it was to have that feeling of belonging. The one thing about immigrants and refugees that I think about all the time, and I had the privilege of working in Arlington public schools, welcoming young immigrants and families bringing their children to our schools, it is very painful because once you enter the school, you are basically silenced because of the language. And although I had a very good academic background, it was difficult for me to be successful in a public schools. At that time, there were no supports for second language learners. And more than anything, the fact that I was a very good student in Bolivia, and I felt that I couldn't succeed in school. So I learned that one of the strategies I took, which was, and I continue to believe in that, is in continuing to learn my own language. So I enrolled in one class at Mount Vernon High School in Spanish. And for that one period, I felt smart. I felt that I could be successful. And that's why I strongly believe that the first language that the students speak at home, ideally, it needs to be supported at school and to be welcomed as an asset to our educational system. Now, fast forward, you see that photo there. I was able to go to college to Radford University, where I received a 4-year scholarship. And I was fortunate, and I say fortunate, to work because back in the 60s, we could, as immigrants, go downtown Washington, get a Social Security card, and be able to work, which that is not the case nowadays. Immigrants do not go on unless they are permanent residents. They are, they cannot have a Social Security card that allows them to work. But I was very lucky in doing that. And at the same time, I was able, for my junior year, you see the photo, to be in love and to meet my future husband, Albert Hugh Giddings. Albert Hugh Giddings, I dedicate the book to him because it is after dealing with the trauma of his death. I was only 23 years old. I was in college, and my husband went to Vietnam. And 5 days before I was supposed to see him, I got the notice that he died in Vietnam in August 1968. I was only 1 year married to him. But it was that painful experience and a trauma that I felt because 3 months later, I learned from the American government that my husband had died by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. For me, that meant maybe he died by suicide in the war. But I kept that as a secret. It was a trauma that I carried with me, and that it didn't come out until dozens of years later. And that's why I write about his death in the book. And I also write about what is the painful consequences of war in not just the person who died, but also the family. And it was my privilege later on as an educator in Arlington in 1976 to be able to welcome in 1976 refugees from Vietnam, from Laos, from Cambodia. They came to Arlington in significant numbers. At that time, Arlington was welcoming refugees, and as a bilingual resource teacher, I had the opportunity to work with them and later as a supervisor to establish programs. And one of the things that I learned quite fast, it was that the public schools, especially in Arlington, are a great opportunity, create a great opportunity for our children, especially those who have recently immigrated, because they feel welcome. The parents are very happy to have their kids in school, and later the students, after they are proficient in English, they can succeed. That's why I believe that education transforms lives. I am definitely grateful for all the opportunities I have had, not just to get a scholarship to college, but also to have the opportunity to, even as I pursue my doctorate, to receive the fellowship from AUW, American Association of University Women, to do my dissertation. So going back to my experience in Arlington, what I found in Arlington, especially Arlington Public Schools, once we started back in the 70s and the 80s, which is very different from now, the public schools had a lot of help in grants from the federal government. At that time, the refugees, be it from Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, later on as refugees coming from Ukraine or refugees coming from Cuba, they had many services, many opportunities for them to learn the language. They had opportunities to get social services. They had opportunities to become permanent residents. That is not the case now. As you all know, refugees from, are not accepted, I guess, except for South Africa. And so the US government had made a significant difference in the lives of our refugees. So again, I feel that my book is part of testament of the power of suffering and the faith and the challenges that we face across the world. And I believe, and as I have said many times to educators in Arlington Public Schools, when our children from refugee families or immigrant families come to our schools, some of the parents bring traumas, especially if some of them had to cross the border. They bring traumas with them. And many times, I believe, if we do not address some of the emotional traumas that some of these children or the families face, or we make it difficult for them to succeed, like we have seen it now, with what's going on, where students and families are very scared to go to school. They are scared to go to work. They're scared to go to Washington, D.C. for the fear of being stopped and being separated from their families. What I would like to do just in a few minutes is to share with you the writing that I have in the preface of my book. And I state, I'm an immigrant. Every thread of my identity is wrapped around that core. I became a citizen of the United States in 1973 and have lived in this country for most of the past 60 years. I have immersed myself in the life of my community and my adopted country, but even now I see myself as a person whose roots lie somewhere else, not here. Like most other immigrants, I know I have wrestled and wrestled still with the question of identity. Who am I? It's a question that most people ask themselves at some point in their lives. But for immigrants, the stakes are higher because our roots are elsewhere. There's a saying in Spanish, no soy de aquí ni soy de allá, which means I'm not from here or from there. Ask anyone who has come here from another country what that saying means to them, and especially if you ask in the language they grew up speaking. Most will tell you, yes, it is true. It is true that almost all immigrants share, no matter where they come from or how they came here. Every immigrant and refugee I know wants to belong, to shed the label them, and to become one of us. The melting pot is part of the American myth, but those who step into it pay a heavy price, laying aside of their identity to become someone they are not. I never wanted to make that choice. Instead, my quest has been to embrace my bicultural identity as a Bolivian American and encourage others to embrace theirs. When I was very young, I received a gift. That gift was the feeling that in my heart, I was not separate from those who were suffering. I understood then, and in a ways that I still struggle to explain. I am them, and they are me. And so I became a weaver not of cloth, but of dreams and shadows. The threads of my loom are family, education, faith, opportunity, service, and the love I have for my two countries, Bolivia and the United States. We are all searching for community. I believe that God calls us to work not in isolation, not for ourselves or for ourselves, but in service to others. In the Catholic Church, community is literally the body of Christ, which means that we are called to serve in community where it exists and to build it where it does not. The great Vietnamese Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh said that community is an organism, and we are like living cells within a body whose life depends on each of us, in the same way that each cell in a body depends on every other. And as Jesus said, even to the least of these. When I was in my mid-70s, a dear friend wove a tapestry and called it Emma Weaver. She attached notes to the threads, naming what she saw as my various accomplishments. I didn't know she had done this until after she died, but I have kept it ever since as a reminder of what my life has been, a weaving of the dreams and shadows of my immigration story, so that others will know and understand that we are not separate. There is no them, only us. And that's how I feel so strongly that Arlington as a community, Encore as a community, we all come together to help each other. And now more than ever, I think we need to provide whatever we support to those in need, especially our brothers and sisters who are new to this country and who may face many challenges due to their immigration status. And for me, the best examples are our own students from Arlington Public Schools or those who have graduated from our schools and came here as young people. And that's why I really would like to take this opportunity right now, not just to share my story, but to share to have Karen and Brian later tell you about their successes in their school, what challenges they have faced, especially as they wanted to go to the university, and more than anything, how they are now working as Arlingtonians to contribute to our state and our country with the gifts that they bring and their professional experience. To start, I would like to introduce Karen. She serves as the Dream Project Executive Director and is an experienced advocate of immigrant rights and educational equity. After witnessing in 2010 the collapse of the Federal Dreams Act, she was one of the founding members of the Dream Project. She has held multiple leadership positions and has been heavily involved with the organization, working on a wide range of social justice issues. In 2020, Karen was honored as one of the Leadership Center Nova 40 Under 40 awardees. Karen has earned her Juris Doctor from Washington and Lee School of Law and holds both a Bachelor of Business Administration and a Bachelor of Arts in History from Southwestern Adventist University in Texas. Karen was born in Cochabamba, Bolivia, raised in Arlington, and I just would like for Karen to share her story as she arrived to Arlington when she was in elementary school. Karen?
Yes, hi. Thank you everyone for having me here. I'm happy to share my story and kind of my reflections on how it relates to the book Dream in Shadows. I think to me it was a very unique experience reading the book as someone from Bolivia, from Cochabamba, where Dr. Emma is. It's almost like reading a story of someone who has kind of lived your own life. I can resonate a lot, I think, to both entering the school system. I was a lot younger. My family immigrated here when I was 5 years old. I am a product of K to 12 APS education, and I understand the frustration Dr. Emma alluded to of entering. I had started kindergarten in Bolivia, and I was always very outspoken, very bright. I always felt smart. I was the one who was picked to do speeches or memorize poems and share them with teachers for plays or instructions. And then I come to the United States and I can't speak the language. I know sometimes I could understand the question, but I couldn't state the answer, and kind of facing that frustration. And at that same time, kind of navigating the school system in the early years of trying to learn customs, the language, and trying to find out identity. I think one story comes to mind where I think it was in my first grade class. I had a teacher kind of tell me that I had to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And by then I had started to understand English, so I actually knew the words now. And I didn't really seem to understand why I had to say it, because at that time I didn't feel American yet. And it's a Pledge of Allegiance. So I said, why would I have to say this? And there were some other parts of the pledge that, like, you say under God, which I felt didn't really align with my religious background at the time. And I just remember as a child kind of having these questions of where do I fit in this new system, in this new country? But I was able to kind of go through the system and really am very proud of having graduated from Randolph Elementary School, then Kenmore and Washington and Lee. Should I continue with
Yeah,
my story
please,
or?
please,
Yeah.
please continue.
Yeah, and I assimilated, I excelled in school. I faced other barriers, I think, through the system. By the time I was in high school, I was very focused on higher education, what I wanted to do after. And that's really where I started to face a lot of systematic barriers that I think the book and Dr. Emma also alludes to. Um, it was less of kind of like racism and people telling you had to speak a certain language or say the pledge or something like that, but it was more expectations of what you could do. I had at times counselors who told me, well, when I would have my whole list of schools, because all my friends had schools and were preparing for college, even as freshmen in high school. And when I talked to my counselor, she said, well, most likely you're going to go to community college. So you really don't need to worry too much about preparing all these other things. You don't really need to take the SATs and that's despite me being a very strong student. There were times where I had to really advocate for myself just to get into advanced placement courses. I did the full IB program, but to even do that, you have to take specific courses as early as seventh grade, and you have to be in the appropriate classes. And I'm thankful to have had a mother who helped me advocate for myself too within the school. And I'm thankful to have grown up in Arlington, where you could take AP and IB courses and not have to pay for the exams. That's something that's mentioned in the book that Dr. Emma fought for. So in many ways, I feel like I'm a product of kind of the advocacy efforts of Dr. Emma through the APS school system. And then one of my hardest challenges came when I was a junior and things in Virginia started to shift. At that time, I was undocumented, and it got more difficult to go to college as an undocumented student. Schools had a little bit of discretion before that year, around 2010. But after that, a lot of schools started changing their policies and not even admitting students, refusing to accept applications. There was an attorney general at the time who had kind of written a letter telling universities not to admit undocumented students. So, in the face of that, a lot of my advocacy came into play. At first, I looked towards legislative relief and helping organize around the DREAM Act. And the DREAM Act would be something that would help undocumented students have a pathway to citizenship. Students who were brought here as young children and graduated college could eventually adjust their status. Unfortunately, that did fail. I was a high school student when I actually personally witnessed the failure. I had skipped school that day to go to the Senate gallery and witness that vote. So after that, it really became more of what do we do if the government won't act? What can we do? And thankfully, we had the support of our parents. We had the support of Dr. Emma, who opened her home up and really her networks up to us and helped us kind of create avenues for us to share our stories, introduced us to supporters, and we would speak at different churches, organizations. Our families would organize fundraisers, and that it became the birth of what is now the Dream Project. At that time, the Dream Project was a very small organization that, when I was a junior, funded its first 4 scholarships to high school seniors. It later funded 15 by the time I graduated college. But its mission is to empower students whose immigration status creates a barrier. I am now the executive director after thankfully having gone to college and then later going to get my law degree. I was able to come back and try to support students now who are facing many, if not worse, barriers than I did when I was going through the system. And at this point, we actually give out 110 scholarships. They're renewable. We provide a wide range of holistic support services, and many of our students are able to get their degrees and pursue their own dreams. So that's kind of my story, the story of the Dream Project, my own journey through APS.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very, very much. Yeah, Karen was one of our valedictorians at that time, Washington Lee, and she and her parents were the founders of this organization. And I believe that nonprofits play such an important role in helping people in need, and the Dream Project continues to do that. Now, I also would like for all of you to meet another young professional who I had met. You know, I knew Karen when she was in kindergarten and first grade, and I knew Brian when he was in the second grade at Barrett Elementary School. Now, Brian is the director of grants and initiatives at Arlington Community Foundation. Where are you, Brian? I think if we can spotlight Brian, please. Okay, there he is. So Brian is the director of grants and initiatives at Arlington Community Foundation. He has a BA from Virginia Commonwealth University, graduating magna cum laude, MS in Policy and Management of Georgetown University, National Urban Alliance Fellow. He received that fellowship. Prior to his selection as a National Urban Fellow, Brian served as the Senior Director at LIFT, a national nonprofit that works to break the cycle of poverty for families. Brian engages in work to support immigrants. As the first generation immigrant from Guatemala, Brian has served as the lead plaintiff, and he can tell you more about that federal case of equal access to education in Virginia. And the lawsuit was successful at changing admission policies at several colleges in Virginia. And for me, it's, when I see Brian and when all of you have all the, meet Karen and Brian, both of them were leaders in making changes that not just impacted them, but also impacted other young immigrants to access higher education. So Brian, please tell us your story a little bit, share some anecdotes and your work for eliminating barriers college access.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. Um, well, I just want to start by saying today is just another example of, Emma always being an advocate for folks and for immigrants and for students, because I feel like, it's one thing to uh, respect somebody and admire somebody, but then be able to learn so much more, like I did by reading her book, by reading your book, Emma. It's like um, you're meeting your heroes, right? Though if you see them on TV, but then you get to meet them. So I learned so much about you, Emma, through the book, and I'm grateful that you shared that with us because it takes vulnerability, and so I can share a little bit about myself. But I did want to start just with my experience in Arlington, just growing up here. So I'm an immigrant from Guatemala. But I don't remember Guatemala from when my family immigrated here. I was 3 years old. So my earliest life memory is going to Walter Reed Preschool, which is no longer exists. It is now Westover Library. Like the physical building is the center building there. If you've ever been to Westover Library, but it was Walter Reed Preschool in the early 90s. And so I remember taking the bus to school. I remember they let us play in the back at this big hill, and I've since gone back to check, and the hill is still there. They would let us go to the top and roll to the bottom. I'm not sure if they allow kids to do that anymore. It doesn't sound very safe, but it was uh, it was home. I loved, my school. I loved my friends, and where we lived. I grew up in Buckingham here in Arlington. Um, and my mom likes to tell this story about that school in particular. We had two teachers. One I remember was Latina, and she helped my mom quite a bit because they could speak Spanish to one another. And my mom tells this story of when early on when we met her, she told us that she was from Chile. And so there's four-year-old me listening to this conversation between two adults, and the teacher says she's from Chile, and so I interject and I say, Chile, it must be spicy there. Like I'd never heard of Chile before. Um, and so my mom likes to tell that story. I think it shows that I've been sort of a smart aleck from the very beginning. But those were, I have so many good memories of those early days in Arlington. And another that I've shared with Emma is an early understanding of sort of race and difference as well, from a child's lens, right? Because kids, this is learned things from that children learn, not that they're sort of born with an understanding of race and difference. Because I went to Barrett Elementary, like Emma mentioned, and I think it illustrates my point when I tell you that I had two best friends. One was Alfredo. He lived on my block. We lived, like, again, in Buckingham, all immigrants on my block. He was from Guatemala, so my parents and his parents were friends. And and then my other best friend I met through school, at the school, because he didn't live near me. His name was Colin. So Alfredo and Colin. And Colin hung out with a lot of the Latino kids too, because he played soccer and he was a really good soccer player. Um, and I remember, this was third grade probably. I remember Colin and a few other friends invited me to their house. And so to go to their, and I, asked permission from my parents, and we sort of worked it out so I could go to their house. But to go to their house, I had to get on a school bus. And the school bus parked out right in front of, on Henderson Road, right in front of Barrett. And it went the other direction from where I used to walk home to Buckingham. It went towards Arlington Forest. And I remember going to Colin and some friends' houses there, and they were all single family homes. They had, basketball court, basketball hoop in the driveway. And I don't ever remember, in retrospect, I don't think I was, um, you know, upset that I didn't have those things. I remember being very impressed and wanting to hang out at their house more. But also, maybe in retrospect, I realized like all the kids on the bus were white, and they were all going towards that part of town essentially, and all my friends were on the Buckingham side of town, and that's the first time I noticed that. Like I didn't notice these things prior. No one sort of talk to me about them. And I think, those formative years are really important because it also matters who's around you when you're um, having these experiences, what support you feel. And I can say that I felt supported in many ways throughout my experience in Arlington. Eventually very closely working with Emma. I would say the fast forwarding a bit to experience at WNL. I went to WNL, and I got connected really to kind of my identity a little bit more through uh, joining the group called LASA, Latin American Student Association. It had been around since the late 80s at WNL. And in my senior year, I was the president of that student group. But I was invited by my friend Oliver, and that's how I sort of learned about not just fun stuff and getting connected to resources. And I think I always understood the stakes about trying to go to college and being the first in my family to go to college in the U.S. But there is where I got connected to folks like Bob Garcia, Mr. Garcia, who was my who was the bilingual resource coordinator at the time at WNL. And I shared with him, again, sort of not understanding the implications, but that my parents had always talked about, oh, we're working on our green cards. We're gonna, um, hopefully, the lawyers that are helping us, these lawyers from Hogar Hispano, Catholic Charities that's still around, hopefully they'll have an answer for us soon. And so I asked him one day, I was like, is that going to impact me going to college? This was 2002, probably.
Mhm.
And I will never forget the face he made of like, basically disappointment and fear. He knew that it was going to be an uphill battle to apply to college because, like Karen mentioned at the time, there was an Attorney General, Jerry Kilgore, who
Mhm.
was essentially instructing state colleges and universities to deny admission to students they suspected that were undocumented, and not only that, but go further and report them to INS at the time, which has since become ICE. And this was 2002. The way that I don't remember sort of when I first learned about this, but I remember the response, and the response was to find the people around me that maybe were going through the same thing, talk through it, and figure out how we were going to get through it together. And that's why, again, my friend Oliver kind of had a similar situation. A few other friends of mine, one of my friends who was eventually valedictorian of our class, Cynthia. Um, we all went through it together. We organized through the student group, but then created another student group called Equal Access Education. And that's what led us to finding some pro bono attorneys that were amazing and challenging these unjust practices uh, that were going to keep a lot of students out of college. Not only us, but again, we understood the stakes. So I, I can share more from that, but essentially, I think since then, what I'd say, that experience is I I started out at Virginia Tech. That was one of the schools that was part of the lawsuit, actually, and they changed their policies to be a lot more to stop considering immigration for admissions purposes. Again, this was not about in-state tuition. This was sort of the early days before the Dreamer movement really picked up, and folks like Karen, expanded that work. And but this was just about being able to attend and be admitted. And so I started out at Virginia Tech, but ended up transferring to VCU. VCU was a much better fit, and that's where I eventually got my green card. The reason it had taken so long is because we were political asylees. We had applied for political asylum, and it took 14 years for our application to be processed and approved. 14 years. I like to emphasize that because I think this notion of, working hard, playing by the rules, and waiting in line can be overly simplistic for folks if they don't understand the challenges, the what it takes to go through our immigration system. And um, and so I became a permanent resident in 2004, became a citizen in 2011, and post college, I was able to do AmeriCorps. I was an AmeriCorps member for several years at the nonprofit that I then worked for 11 years after that, called Lyft, and was able to have a lot of roles. That was financial and career coaching for parents of young kids. I saw myself and my parents in the parents that we worked with often, um, and so in some ways it was natural. It was easy to understand where they were coming from. Um, and so fast forward, got the opportunity to attend Georgetown and wanted to come back to Arlington specifically. So I worked in DC primarily all those years, got to understand yeah, just the work and the amazing advocates that work in DC on this stuff every day. But I wanted to come home. I wanted to work in Arlington and, give back to the community that's given me so much. And I'm privileged to stay connected to Emma and so many folks, that care about this issue and are supporting immigrants in what's a very challenging time for immigrants. So happy to share more, but thanks, Emma.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Karen. And I think that, Luis, do we want now to start with questions? I guess while we wait for questions is part of the struggle that we have faced in Virginia is when our students come through our school system, like Brian and Karen, being successful and having followed all the rules, when they find themselves in their senior year, that they don't have the same opportunities than their fellow friends have, be it at one point driver's license, be it having a social security, having access to scholarships, not just from, a dream project, but other scholarships. And so our immigrant students and refugee students face a lot of challenges. Just for your information, there was a Supreme Court decision, Plyer versus Doe in 1974, that allowed students, regardless of their immigration status, to attend our public schools, and if they live within the area. So as a result, we do have students that have gone through the system, but due to their immigration status, they face a lot of barriers. And of course, we have families that have been here 20, 30 years that are unable to adjust their status. So,
Well, thank you, Emma, and thank you, Brian and Karen. Very enlightening to all those of us that have not had that struggle, that we just assume things. We're going to college, it's just which college versus, the challenge of will I get in? I think the other thought that I had is I was watching these two very attractive young people, and I said, what a waste if they didn't get a chance to be who they are. I mean, you're both very impressive. So as an adult a lot older than you are, I'd like to compliment you on your work and how well you've done. And then, of course, Emma, you were there. You were their role model. You were there. You made it happen. So I'm just really representing everybody listening to this to say, wow. And I'm so glad that you got through the struggles and achieved what you have and lead the lives that you have
yeah,
been
but,
leading.
but one of the things, Luis, I just want to also clarify that it was also their parents, their parents that really supported them, and even the formation of the Dream Project was the parents, the students, and then some supporters. The same as Brian. When Brian faced that challenge, it was again the community that came together, but also was allies. Allies were very important. I remember Brian that had to pay out-of-state tuition. Remember when you were at Virginia Tech, and we're talking about thousands of dollars. And I think my church at that time, Nova Catholic Community, helped until he was able to get his green card, so his application approved. So that's why I'm very happy that we are here with your organization, because it's people like you all that have come to assist immigrant and children of immigrants go through the system and to help them.
Brian and Karen, you are muted, so please unmute so that we can ask you questions as well. I will remind everybody to ask questions through the Q&A, not through chat, through the Q&A, and then once they come on, I will read them and pass it to either Emma or Brian or Karen, depending on what came up.
Yeah. Also, I am unmuted, but it says my camera is disabled by the host, so I can't turn my camera on.
Okay. Patty, can you help with that?
Okay.
There we go. There we go. So I'd like to kind of kick things off a little bit. Brian, when you said 14 years, that's just amazing, and I don't know if people know that. I know there's a kind of general knowledge that it takes a long time, but when you hear 14 years, that's different than, oh, it's a long time, a vague thing. Is that the norm, that it will take over 10 years for somebody to go through the process and eventually get to the green card stage? And Emma or Brian, or anybody, can you
Well,
answer?
it depends on the visa. I mean, nowadays it's not like you can go and apply for, like when I came, in 61, I was at that time, we didn't have the barriers even for work or things like that. So after 1965, the law changed for admission for immigrants from Latin America. And so we were able to become permanent residents back in 65 if we had a sponsor. That has changed. Nowadays, I mean, and probably Karen can talk to you more about it because she is a lawyer, and maybe you can differentiate the different statuses and the different quota systems that we have.
Karen?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think, it's very complex and every immigrant story is different. Some individuals don't really have a pathway to adjust if they came crossing the border. Sometimes, even if there's a way, they still have to face a 10-year ban where they would have to go back to their country, wait 10 years, and then apply for the process. So that's why many don't go back. There's a myth that some people can just get married and adjust their status, but if you cross the border, that's not always a solution. For those that do enter legally through a plane, it depends on how they arrive. Some come with tourist visas, working visas, some come with employment, but temporary employment, and for whatever reason they overstay. And there's really no process for them to adjust once you're out of status, unless there's some type of widespread immigration relief, or there's a few areas within the law that some individuals are able to qualify for, but um, it's very difficult, I'll say, even to do it legally. We have this myth that people can just bring in their family members once one has it. Um, the length of time for those, depending on the country, can be incredibly long. I know for some countries that have long wait times, like Mexico, India, China, if you want to sponsor a certain type of family member, it can be up to 25, 30 years. I've heard stories of immigrants who finally get it approved to be able to bring a sibling in, and the sibling has passed away in that time period. And I really emphasize that for Americans. There's this concept that, well, why don't they just get in line? Why don't they just wait? And it's not like there's a very simple wait line that you can get into. I also would say there's a lot of reasons people leave their country. For a lot of asylees seeking refuge, it's not like they can plan out to wait 10, 15 years when they're escaping violence or poverty. They usually get out and try to get to the first safe country they can. For others that are trying to immigrate for economic reasons, again, they're looking for employment or work. I think that there's a lot of different barriers, actually. As a student attorney, I briefly spent some time in Tijuana, helping kind of these waves of immigrants that were coming in 2020. There was news about it, the caravans, it was all big buzzwords, but when you're really there, you really hear the stories. I saw people from everywhere. It wasn't just kind of this massive wave of Central Americans. There was a lot of Central Americans who were escaping poverty, environmental disaster, violence, but there were people all the way from Africa that had African countries that had crossed over 20 borders to get to that point and legally ask for asylum. There were individuals from Middle East countries, from Asian countries, because you do have to get to a border to ask for asylum. So that's why there was that kind of concentration there. And for many of them, those who did manage to get in, I assume that their process is going to be long and probably just as long as Brian's, if not longer, if they're able to get status. And for many of them, they are turned away at the door and they never even get a chance to claim their
I
asylum.
also spoke with a immigration lawyer fairly recently who said that now with this administration, the rules keep changing. So
Yes.
that you're going one way and you have a path, and oh no, we're not doing that anymore. Now we're going to another direction.
Yeah.
Is that an increasing problem?
Yes, I will say I was actually in law school the first term of Trump's years, and I always say kind of this joke. My most expensive textbook that I bought was my immigration law book. I took immigration law, and it was because I could not buy a used one. It had changed so much, and law is very slow. You base everything on precedent. But really, it became outdated by the time I took the class. And then when I tried to sell it, it really wasn't worth anything because it had changed that much within the year I was taking it. And
Within 1 year, within 1 year.
yes, and
Wow.
my professor who had been teaching for 30 years had said, it's almost like my experience doesn't matter anymore.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. So
it's a
we
really
have a question in here from Bren. What can those of us do who want to help? What's the top 3 things that we should do? As I'm an Alexandrians and Arlingtonians and beyond, Northern Virginia.
I want to plug in for the Dream Project.
Okay.
The Dream Project is a nonprofit organization that helps providing scholarships, mentoring. And the website, what's the website, Karen?
dreamproject.org. I will put it in the chat.
Okay. That's one way. There is many ways. We find that in our schools, for example, there's a lot of families right now that are really experiencing financial trouble, financial difficulties because they're unable to work. And I know that, for example, my church helps many of the nonprofits in Arlington that provide food, that provide shelter. I am a great believer of nonprofit help, and I probably, Brian, you also have some suggestions. But more than anything, I will say it is important to, as much as we can, to really establish the relationship. By relationship, I mean to relate to the person. It could be a waiter, or or it could be the person that is cleaning your office, or it could be the construction worker, or it could be, anybody that you know that they are immigrants or refugees. At this time, there is such a need of acceptance. And people are, I know that there's some people that are even afraid to take the bus because they feel that they're going to have the looks, or it's as silly as that, it seems. But just relating to that person as they are one of us. That's why I always say they are us. It's not that they are, but of course, there's other organizations, and I will let Brian speak to that too, because I know that the Community Foundation has worked with some
Brian?
nonprofits.
Yeah, just well, first, kind of broadly, the question of how to help. I actually think, aside from organizations for a second, I think it's really hard to ask for help if you're in a challenging situation with your family, or if you're a kid and and your family's going through a difficult moment right now. You're an immigrant, and your kid and your parents are afraid, and maybe you're doing less as a family, going out less, and it can be really hard to ask for for help around you. And I remember, um, frankly, I remember my parents telling me not to share the family business outside the home, right? Because I mean, I think for immigrants, um, respectability is really important. Being able to, um, you know, work on the things that you need to work on, and not have people know all the stuff about what you're going through. Maybe that's true of a lot of families, but I think in immigrant families, it's particularly true. Um, and so once I was able to find kind of safe people to share that with, there was a few that I can think of at each school level, starting at Barrett. Um, it really made a difference. So if you can be one of those safe people for a young person, or if you can be that for somebody around you in your community, and I think the ways to do that are not only waiting for somebody to ask for help. You don't have to wait for that, but I think the question now, we can speak safely about how to help, and we'll give some ideas, but sometimes it's just going and doing the thing, like whether it's donating the money, or, providing the help, because you want to be available to somebody, and you see that, something is needed, as opposed to asking lots of questions about it. Because again, it can be really hard to talk through what some of those challenges are. So I think at the Community Foundation, we have a great tool called the Arlington Nonprofit Directory. You can actually sort based on different populations, including immigrants, to see the organizations working in Arlington to do this. And what really stood out for me, as I mentioned, in connecting to other folks that were going through something similar was student organizations at WNL. And we actually had one at the time called CELA. You'll remember this, Emma, Congreso Estudiantil Latinoamericano. The acronym was CELA. And it was sort of a coalition of each Latino organization at each high school. And so I remember being able to, connect with people across the high schools. And that's where I first saw that like, wow, if we work on this together, we can. It's not just me going through this. There's a lot of, I think, young people right now that will find it hard to ask for help, might not feel comfortable talking about some of these challenges, but also may feel isolated. And I think countering that isolation again in ways that don't require them to ask you, "Hey, are you isolated?" Just doing the thing is really important.
Well, Brian, so I'd like to follow up on that. So I understand what you're saying generally, but if somebody like me or any of us on the call, you say, well, we'd like to help in a tangible way. Are there three organizations that you would say start here and you can donate to them? Certainly, we can all donate, but this is a thing where kids hang out Thursday nights and they'd love to have you, that kind of tangible thing. Is there anything?
Yeah, like you have Aspire, the after school program
Okay.
that is in Arlington the Dream Project. For me, the Legal Justice Aid Justice Center. I mean, those are just three that come very, there's also the Hispanic Parent Association where the Janet Valenzuela accepts gift cards from Giant, from
Okay.
this. And I think Brian had just posted the nonprofit search. Then you have the Shirlington Employment Center too. Nonprofits and some churches, they really play a very important role. And
The
even the
churches.
people that work for you, that's one of the, sometimes I recognize that as a need, because people can come and clean your house, but to get to your house, there's fear. And it's not because they may be, you could be a US citizen and sound like an immigrant. So I know that in DC, they are stopping people, regardless if they are US citizens or permanent residents or, or whatever, they have an asylum, pending asylum. Right now, unfortunately, the problem is that they are not following procedures that before, we were used to have them follow, that you have to have a warrant for people to come and knock at your door or to ask for your papers. And I think Karen can share some stories. I can share some stories, or Brian too. It's a daily occurrence of fear.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure that's true. Alexandria, we're facing the same thing.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah, it's throughout the United States.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you can just put those few organizations in the chat, then we'll share that just so that any one of you can do that. Lynn asked the questions. Emma, there were photos of you with Walter
Tejada, what?
Tejada, an Arlington board member. Can you tell us more about his work on this topic with you?
Okay. Number one, Walter was the first Latino elected to the county board. Walter Tejada is from El Salvador, and he started his work when some of the condominium, the Arna Valley condominium, were turned condominiums. Walter has been and continues to be, right now, he is the chair of the Virginia Latino Leaders, the coalition, Virginia Latino Leaders Coalition. I am a member of that organization. It's a nonprofit organization that works to advance civic engagement of Latinos. So Walter continues to be one of my best friends and one of the most genuine leaders I know.
Okay, thank you. I just had a note to myself. So this question's for me. So have you seen that, I'll say, regular people's perceptions have changed over the last certainly year, but year and a half, that they're more uncomfortable relating, or they're more negative about immigrants than they used to be? I mean, with the current political situation, do you find that there's a different vibe out there, even among regular people? I'm not talking about ICE coming out, or
No,
officials.
well, the thing is that what I find is not regular people, is some people I know that are great allies and continue to work and advance and donate and work with right now, for example, the organizations that we have in Alexandria helping Afghani refugees. There's very important organization that RAFT, I think it's called. Because right now, for example, Afghanis are going through very difficult times because of some of their supports as refugees have been taken away. What I find that is different now, not just for what is happening at the immigration, at the Trump administration, but it's the whole rhetoric about who are we as immigrants. For me, I have never heard before that we talk about a national group, a group like Somalians, and call them garbage, or repeating the misinformation that is provided by, sometimes the news. I almost feel, even though I am privileged to be a US citizen, and to be financially stable, is like we almost have to have this protection. Like, I don't watch news anymore because I just don't want to be insulted all the time. And like I talked to the high school students at Yorktown. I was invited to share about my book, and many of the students that were, of course, immigrants or others, they said, thank you. Thank you very much for openly stating that we are immigrants, that we support our community, and that we contribute to this country. So right now, even us are at a loss. How is it that we can change that narrative? And as you know, having the opportunity for you to meet Brian and Karen, there are two examples, but there's hundreds of examples of people that continue to contribute to the community because we believe in solidarity and reciprocity. And we want to help, and we help. And we want to be friends with people and not feel that we are outsiders. I don't know. That's my perspective. I don't know what Karen and Brian can say.
Anything to add, Karen and Brian? Or did Emma sum it up?
I agree with everything Dr. Emma has said. I do think there's also an interesting shift that I've been seeing where maybe people who didn't like immigrants or who had this bad conception, now you kind of see these interviews they're doing where they're like, well, I didn't mean this person who was, a focal point of their community, their church member, their neighbor, their local babysitter, or um, I think a lot of people are surprised just how deeply embedded immigrants are in America and in our day-to-day lives. They are equal members of our community. We are part of everyone's part, and you interact with them. And I think it's interesting to see, to me, how surprised people are at how much they're being affected by seeing their neighbors. Sometimes it's easy to say you voted for this for some of these people who were, actively or openly anti-immigrant. But at the same time, I think this enforcement's showcasing just how instrumental immigrants are to the school systems, to the workforce, to everyday lives, churches, schools. You see teachers kind of posting their classrooms and say, talking and speaking out about like some of my students just didn't come back after this break. And whether they were detained or whether the parents are choosing to keep them home, we don't know. But you're seeing the impact in their schools. You're seeing children lose their friends, wondering what happened to them. And it's sad, but I'm hoping it wakes the consciousness of this country up and really helps people see immigrants as what they are, which is just another part
Mhm.
of the community.
Great. Brian,
Yeah,
anything?
I'll go a little further in that. Um, I think that this sort of expectations that many immigrants have for themselves, particularly, for example, parents of their kids, or just what you need to do to, I think, get ahead in this country, I think has always been um, a very high expectation. That's part of what you're working towards. It's not just the challenges in your environment, but sort of um, the challenges from within your own family and within, what you want to accomplish. And but the reason I think that's important and sort of relevant to your question is that um, this notion of uh, working hard and playing by the rules, and if you do that, you can get ahead. It's not that it's untrue. It's just that as an immigrant, I think you have to recognize that it's often going to feel like you're not doing enough, like you are not meeting the definition for whether it's because you go to like I did, the first university I started at didn't feel like a very welcoming place. It was predominantly white. It was very different culturally than anything I had ever experienced, very different than Arlington, which I thought was a very diverse and welcoming environment. And so then you start to think, well, is it in my head, or is this place actually like this? And, it's sort of this, I think Emma talks a lot about this, about, the identity formation, and the constant work that takes. And, I've done work in anti-poverty work, and this talking about sort of the mental bandwidth it takes to go about your day when you're working on with very limited resources, not because you lack motivation, not because you lack creativity, but you literally don't have the money you need to make your life easier like some other folks will. And I think the challenge becomes that we often judge folks living in poverty more harshly than we would someone else who may not have the same motivation or creativity, but they, have the resources to start out with. And I think that's true of immigrants as well. I think that harsh judgment can be there. And what's disappointing to me is, or not disappointing, but what sort of is revealed through what we're going through, particularly this year, is that for some folks, not everybody, but for some folks that have claimed that, our immigration system needs to change significantly and be much more restrictive. And um, it's it's clear that now it's becoming clear, I think, that it's wasn't always about playing by the rules and working hard, because if that were the case, there'd be there'd be many immigrants that were being rewarded for doing that. But that's not what we see happening now. Like Emma was saying, in some ways, it doesn't particularly matter where you are in the immigration process. It could be me in year 13 of 14 years of waiting that could be susceptible to being detained now, and that process being thrown out the window under the current administration's policies. And so what message does that send? Is that actually about, uh, you know, somebody that went through a very hard to find, very hard to access, very hard to go through process, and maybe took some steps in that direction and is still essentially punished? I think there are I think there's just other factors that make it so that immigrants are made to work harder, jump higher, push
Mhm.
harder through the system. And there isn't that relief always at the end of the process. And honestly, I think that's also what makes it. I mean, I appreciate that Emma, is pointing to me and Karen as success stories, but I worry about, the students that may not be viewed as success stories right away. And the difference between me and a student like that is not that wide. It's not because I was smarter or worked harder. It could be a lot of different factors that were so much beyond their control. And that's where sorry to wrap up. I think the question that we got about how you can help, some of it is actually just clarifying some of these stereotypes I think we make about folks, sort of viewing only highly academic achieving students as exceptional, standing out from the rest of immigrant students. I don't think that's the only way to do it. I think obviously there's an important role there for scholarships and for the work that many nonprofits do. But I think it's asking that broader question, and one that we would ask whether the student was an immigrant or not. But what is it that we need to do collectively to lift all these students up and give them actually more optimism that this country actually provides a pathway for them to not just become citizens and what have you, but to be economically mobile, to care for themselves and for their families. Again, that's true whether you're an immigrant or not. That should be true. And I don't think we're doing a good enough job of that as a country.
Okay, thank you. Another question just came up from Bren. Do you have any thoughts on the increased percentage of Latinos who supported Donald Trump in the last election? Anybody?
I can speak
ahead.
first, and I'm sure
Yeah.
everyone has thoughts. I would say, it's very easy to paint certain people as bad, or why would they do that? I know Latinos who voted for Trump. I know some of them who have even gone out of their way to support undocumented families. They do food drives, they house undocumented, and there's a lot of reasons. I think some of them maybe didn't think he would do what he was saying, unfortunately. But I would also say I think that there was a messaging issue for a lot of voters, Latino voters, immigrant voters, not just Latinos. It was the economy is bad. It has been bad. Middle class families and lower middle class families are suffering, and they were looking for jobs. They were looking for messaging about jobs, about the economy, about buying homes. And Trump knew how to speak to them. I think his party is very good at grassroots communicating. I think it's very easy for people in a tough situation to grab onto that, and to anyone who is offering change or abruption, to cling to that. And, I want to say I don't vilify those people. I think by vilifying certain people, sometimes we close the lines of communication. I don't want to excuse anyone's actions or their voting. But I think there's a lot of different layers as to why immigrants vote the way they do. I also think the other party could do better at communicating with Latinos and their needs and speaking directly to them. One thing about Trump is he knows how to keep a message simple, to the point, and to kind of target audiences. And a lot of voters I know just, many of them are immigrants themselves. They came to this country with the American dream to have a stable job, have a home, start a business, and it's just getting harder to do that. So they went with a candidate who was speaking to those points, maybe with the hope that he was just kidding about the other stuff. But unfortunately, that's not the case.
Emma or Brian, anything to add?
Well, I think that there is an element within any group, be it immigrants, Latinos, African Americans, Asians, or whatever other group, that some people may have been attracted to this macho image, this image of a strong businessman that will make a difference. I think that the Latino community, we all feel very, we need to come together and to continue, like with the Latino Leaders Council, becoming more civically engaged. But because of the fears that we have right now, the whole gathering of people, of working together, of doing training, has been significantly limited. I remember working very hard with the Latino community for Obama. And so we had this very strong sense of a collective group that was working together in this election. But after that, I think that this whole community engagement and getting more people to vote, especially young people, there's a lot of disillusionment also with, I don't mean 18-year-olds, but I know how hard it is, for example, for my two adult children who are teachers. You know, my son, I'm fortunate to have a house, and my son and his wife and my grandchild, they can live there with a low rent, but it's very hard to make ends meet and to live what Brian was talking about, uh, at a middle class lifestyle. I was able to buy a home back in the 60s for $100,000, 70s, $100,000. I mean, my son, who's a teacher, and his wife who works, who pays $2,400 for childcare, he can't buy
The
a house.
economics. Yeah.
The economics part is a very serious business, concern.
I do want to, Catherine from the library just posted that there's a book recommendation, a book that's at the library called Defectors, The Rise of Latinos Far Right and What It Means for America. So that is in the library by Paola Ramos.
Ramos, yeah.
Ramos. So look for that. I have one final question because we're getting towards the end. What is a range of cost for an immigrant to come here to get some sort of legal status, say at least up to the green card? Are we talking about on average $5,000, $50,000? What is there a not a percentage, is there a number that we can, or a range that will help us understand
I
the
don't think
difficult
it's
financial?
just money. I know
I
that
don't think so,
Trump
but
is
what is it?
offering, I'm
What
saying
is
Trump
money?
is offering a green card for how much money?
1 million, I think.
1 million.
Oh, yeah. Well,
There,
forget
I mean,
that.
I know those are the extremes, but it's also the extremes now for somebody, and it was today in the Washington Post, for a doctor to come to work in a rural area from India. It was the example that they have in the Washington Post, that the hospital would have to pay $100,000 to have that doctor from India receive an H-1 visa. You know, the visa is for professionals to work in a given organization. So even businesses or hospitals, for them to bring immigrants who are nurses or with a temporary status visa like is the H-1, it's just prohibitive. So can you come and get a green card if you have $10,000? No, because the path to get a green card is so difficult
Well,
that it's
that's my
not
question,
money
though.
that will make the difference. Or if you pay a lawyer $10,000 or $30,000, you may not be able to still
Yeah.
get that
No,
visa.
so those are the kind of numbers we're talking
Yeah.
about, $10,000, $30,000. Karen,
Yes.
yes? Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, it really depends on the process. And I think that's even just the paperwork once you get here. Even to apply for a visa, whatever the visa is, you have to get to an embassy in your country. Most countries have one embassy, so you have to fly to whatever that city is. I try to find housing, get an interview. So even before you even have your application and you're already looking at price, which is why, a lot of immigrants who do immigrate legally have at least some middle class background from their homes versus people who have to cross the border. And, frankly, if it was just about the money, crossing the border in itself probably costs between 10 to 35, $40,000
Wow.
to
Wow.
even get through that process. It depends on how you're doing it, but it really is not just the money side. It's just the complexity of even trying to apply, even to get an interview. And there's an equity element to it too, because even if you're trying to do it legally, it's so discretionary. So you can even do everything right, get to an interview, and it's really up to the person interviewing you. They can decide that day that,
Is that right? Okay.
yeah, they gave too many visas to someone who looked like you, so they are not going to do it anymore. There's so many elements to it, and even if you are able to adjust your status, lawyer fees themselves are in the thousands, so that's not even the application costs. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Somebody did just put, a friend just said, thank you very much, all of you, for helping to enlighten us today. So that's the word I would use too. Thank you very much. I do want to also talk about Emma's book there, I think, Patty, we can put on this slide with the name of the book and some places that people can get the book. I think it's also at the library. So please do that. Let me just pull this off. So please do that. Dreams and Shadows, An Immigrant's Journey by Emma. Please do get it. Also, Brian and Karen, thank you for your good work as well. You're really exemplary in terms of what can be done when we invest in people, right? We should be investing in everybody like you to achieve what you've achieved. So thank you very much for your work in this area. I can see somebody giving an applause going all the way up the screen. So I think others share my thought on that. I also wanted to remind everybody to take the survey at the end of this presentation so we can give Emma and Brian and Karen some feedback on the presentation. And also keep watching out for the special events emails coming out because we have some exciting things happening in the first quarter. So thank you very much, Emma and Karen and Brian, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.